honored to have you here, and I want to thank you for helping bring this particular series to a close. It's been intriguing and fascinating to me as I listen to each of the authors. And particularly, I know you weren't scheduled to be in this slot, but I think it's especially fitting to have you bring this series to a close because you're one of our very own, and we're proud that you're here and part of that. And just to give you a very small token of our appreciation for all that you do for us and for your writing, I'd like to give you this certificate of appreciation.
Very much appreciated. If I could have you short term.
You want to turn it on?
See that? That's great. Thank
So
you,
we
Dr.
thank you for sharing your talents, your energies with us. You know, I've been intrigued as I've had a chance to share with some of your literature courses from time to time. I know you're going to bring immense insights to this class. And just one question before we finish. I know how much you love fishing, and I know you can parlay your hobbies into that, but with the temperatures outside today, you get ice fishing?
Actually, if you have the right attire, you can fish in weather like this.
Okay.
The problem is that the guides ice up on your rod all the time. So you can't cast your line. That's the problem. But as far as temperatures go, I've fished in this kind of weather before. No, it is an honor to be here. I'd like to start by getting the fact that you're wrapping up everything. I'd kind of like to get some input from the students. This is almost more from a dean's perspective as to how this thing worked out this semester. Because when Jamie wanted to teach this class, he said, I want to do it differently than it's been done before. And it's a totally different approach to teaching the class. And I said, hey, it sounds fantastic, let's run with it. So how's it been as a student's view?
I think I should step outside, right?
No, this isn't about the course, but how did it go with the authors coming? What did you think?
I enjoyed it because I was able to get a variety of different perspectives of literature from different viewpoints, and the authors really helped increase the learning and made it a very nice variety. I enjoyed it a whole lot.
Good. So you liked it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
Kylie?
It was a really great supplement to the class because I've taken Dr. Jumkani's classes before, like with major British authors. It was great to be able to sit down and have a discussion about the pieces that we read, but adding this component into this class just made it completely different level. Just having that personal interaction with authors was great.
Did you find it inspiring any?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Michael?
I enjoy this class a lot. I found it very interesting. If Jumkandi ever has any more of these, I'll definitely come to them.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to add anything?
It was the first time I'd ever had Dr. Giancotti, so I'd never had his class before. So it was really nice. I enjoyed it.
Good. Well, I wasn't given any parameters on this talk, so I just want to keep it informal. And I thought the best thing to do would just sort of go back and give a chronological discussion of what I've published and that sort of development over time. And it's interesting that Jim's here because Jim was part of the first books that came out when I was here at the college. These are the first two books here. This actually is the fifth one in a series of books, but the first one came out back in the early 2000s, and Jim covered those, and he knows all about it. But the rest of you, this will be new information for. So when I first decided where I would start, I thought back to when I was at Florida State, and I was publishing a collection of poems, and I'll get to that later. This was published in 1996, and then I started thinking, but I really started writing before that, and I think I had some works published before that. So I dug around and I came up with this. This was published by the Virginia Beach school system in the 80s, 81 I think it was. And I was in an AP English class, and the AP English classes throughout the whole school system had what they called a visiting poet series. So published poets came to the AP classes and worked with the students on writing poetry. And so this is the first work that I ever had published, is in here. And I want to read it for you, but I have to give you a little background on it first. It's called Learning. It's about, hang on a second. So I live on a farm in Floyd that it's a fifth generation. My daughter's the fifth generation living on our farm. I'd say there's cattle on it. It used to be horses. I actually owned horses at one time. I bought some horses from Frank Ball and brought them over to our farm in Floyd. It's actually a funny story. He had a three-legged goat, and we bought a horse from him. It was only a colt. This is all extemporaneous right now. And I took because we didn't have any company for this young colt, we'd just taken this from his mother, a year old. He said, take the goat with it too, take the three-legged goat. So I bring a three-legged goat, and Thor, who was born during the thunderstorm, that's the name of our horse, is a beautiful paint home. And I didn't know anything about goats. I'm really not much of a farmer, to be honest with you. My cousin still farms the farm. We have cattle on it, but I just help round them up every once in a while. I don't know anything much more about farming than that. And I didn't know you were supposed to tie up a goat. So the next day, the goat's gone. So then we're putting out these things at the local market. Anyone seen a three-legged goat? Everybody thinks it's a joke, but literally lost it. Never saw the three-legged goat again. Don't know what happened to it. But when I was a kid, my dad was an administrator at Duke University, and we came up to visit what would be my grandparents with a friend of his family who was a pediatrician at Duke, and they had a couple of young girls. And I think I was 4 or 5. I had to call my mom this morning on the way in and ask her about how old I was. She said she thought I was probably 4. And we were playing out in the pastures, and like I said, I didn't know much about farm life then, and I don't know a whole lot more about it now, actually, to be honest with you. I'm not a farmer. I'm not claiming to be, where it's a hard life, but I'm fortunate enough to live on a farm that's been in my family for a long time. So I was kicked by a horse that day, and kicked right through a barbed wire fence, 4 years old. All right, so this poem's about that. It's called Learning, and it's told through the eyes of that boy. It says, though the fresh sun warms the day, the morning grass is dampening me from my shoes to my hips as I wade through it in excitement. So big, so beautiful. What hair is this called a coat? Shines a golden brown reflection of the sun. Be careful, I hear. Fear? Should I? I will touch it. So large to walk around, such huge legs and tail and ellipses. Help! Mommy, it hurts, it hurts. Have the girls leave, please, please. It hurts more. Is he okay? Yes. And hooves that frighten me. So the last sentence were the ellipses coming back after the horse had kicked me. And the doctor immediately, after I got kicked right in the buttocks, because I'm only this tall, and we're out in the pasture, so the grass is up to my waist, kicks me in the buttocks. He immediately runs over and pulls my pants down to see if anything's, and these girls were running around, and that impression, that was the most embarrassed I'd ever been at that point in my life when I wrote this poem. But that was the first poem I ever had published anywhere. So that, moving on to the next phase of things, I ended up at Florida State University in their literary theory and contemporary literature program, which was a small part of their school. Their biggest programs were composition theory and MFA. They have a huge MFA. On par with Iowa's MFA program. So a lot of my friends were writers. They were there to pursue writing. So I hung out with them. I would read at these big poetry slams on campus and things because I dabbled in poetry. And I'm really proud that this poem got published because of the competition I was up against down there at Florida State. It's in a literary journal called Elephants and Other Gods. And I read this at Agora at the very first Agora, this poem here. Before I read that, this reminds me, writing that first poem that I read, and actually pretty much everything I'll read for you, there's a maxim in writing that I've always tried to follow. It's called write what you know. Or write what you know. And that first poem was speaking from experience. And I think all good writing really comes from experience. This one's called Listening for Trains. Afterwards, while lying there listening for trains, they watch the shadows of a dwindling candle disappear from the ceiling. It looks like a laughing water dragon, he said, staring through the thick silence to the ceiling. Then, after a period of not-so-sober darkness, she asked, "When will the trains come? Is it by schedule?" "No," he answered. "I hope not. It's better when you don't know," she said, as the handsome noise of silence began to overwhelm them. An angel-like rain settled in, and instead of trains, the air sounded like butterflies hatching from cocoons. So there's some imagery working that point. So that's where I started writing, was with poetry. All right, so that takes me on to the next thing. And I don't know, have y'all had many sort of creative writing, nonfiction authors at all? Okay. Yeah, you believe? Okay. So this was actually my dissertation I wrote at Florida State. And it's a book, it's published in SUNY's Press on postmodern theory, and with a lot of authors who are very acclaimed postmodern critics, actually. A lot of the people that were in my dissertation I was quoting are in the same series that SUNY Press published. But I was fortunate enough, I worked with a really strong committee when I was at Florida State who said this is, because of what I was working on, was cutting edge literary theory. I was working with Jean Baudrillard, who was a French theorist who's writing in the 80s, contemporary to what I was doing. They said this is current enough, this should get published. So they really pushed me to write something that was publishable. And once I finished, I started looking into presses that published contemporary literary theory, and SUNY Press, State University of New York Press, was one of the leading presses, and I sent it off, and then this was actually accepted to be published. So going from a dissertation to a book is a big step. Okay? You have to write chapters, you have to write an index, you have to have a foreword. There's all these things that don't necessarily go into a dissertation. So it was quite a project to turn this dissertation into a book. So I thought maybe I would read, instead of trying to read from it, I would just read the back cover so you know what it was about. And this you can still buy on Amazon.com. It's out there, as are the rest of my books that we're going to discuss. It's called the title of the book is called Reading Simulacra, Fatal Theories for Postmodernity. And the idea of fatal theories is that, and simulacra, which is a Platonic term, Plato, is that simulation is replacing the real in so many areas and facets of our culture that it's becoming a fatal project, that the real is becoming supplanted by the simulated, the simulacra, the virtual, so on and so forth. I was writing this in 1990. All right, I think it's almost prophetic in some way. So, Reading Simulacra analyzes the ways in which our culture has become fatally immersed in simulation. Television, the internet, virtual reality, and other advancements in technology and information processing have brought about an order in which simulations and digital images permeate our experiences of the world so deeply that their distinctions from reality appear seamless. Through a careful study of some of the most important postmodern theorists, particularly Jean Baudrillard and Deleuze and Guattari, this book puts forth two communication strategies, seduction and rupture, for a world where the difference between what is real and what is simulating has disappeared. In an attempt to discern meaning from this contemporary situation, N.W. Smith examines a range of contemporary texts that have, in the past, resisted traditional analysis. So I set up this framework for analysis, and then the rest of the book I apply to these different works and texts. These include the O.J. Simpson trial. So there's a chapter on the O.J. Simpson trial, how that became like a television show that people became addicted to. Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. Reese Williams, and that's a movie, of course. Reese Williams' Pair of Eyes is a book. Kathy Acker's Blood and Guts in High School. And Don Quixote, which Dr. Conley's taught. I believe he's taught Kathy Acker before. I've taught Kathy Acker here.
We had Pam write about
Pam wrote about Kathy Acker, you're right, yeah. And Clarence Major's My Amputations, and Baudrillard's America, all of which represent the obscenity of hyper-signified existence. That's what the publisher put on the back of the book. And then here's a review from Stephen Fole. The book offers a succinct, if often terrifying glimpse into a world increasingly governed by nearly instantaneous telecommunicative feedback and the seductive lure of mass-mediated simulacra. It addresses important cultural and political concerns, theorists, and literary works at the core of contemporary debates about the meaning of human existence and experience. So that was the first book I actually had published by a university press.
Sounds like you could use the same framework and tweak it a little bit, and you could use the same main premise of that book and framework and rewrite it today, and it would be with focusing on what you now know with all the social media and everything else, and it would be really interesting.
Yeah, I've thought about doing that, but I don't.
Kind of a vindication.
Yeah, I'll tell you what happened. That's a good point, because it's more relevant now than ever.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You
You
could kind of, like I said, use the phrase, same. It looks like you set up a way to analyze it, and like you use those movies. But now, gosh, you would have so much more to inject into it to your.
Yeah. But here's the thing. So my career took a shift. So I've written that, and then I ended up at Bluefield State. And I did teach the 304 class, approaches class, for a number of years. I even taught for Marshall University for a while. And I taught courses in postmodern literature and theory. We even used my book for a class one time as one of the books that we read. And I was still teaching here, but I taught there as well. Things took a different direction for me. So we used to have a 101, we still have a 101, 102. We had a 103 class. The 103 class, this is English 101, 102, 103, was called technical writing. And the engineers and some of the business folks would usually take that class as opposed to the 101, 102, which everybody else would take. Well, they still took 101. It was either 102 or 103. So I began teaching the 103 class in technical writing. And at the same time, I'm pursuing my passion of fly fishing all around the area. Because in essence, I didn't really grow up here, but I'd gone to school in Blacksburg. I spent summers on the farm, and my grandfather had a cabin on the river. So my cousin and I would run around the field with me when I got kicked by the horse. Would go fishing all the time. So I knew all these places to fish. And people would say, you need to write something about it, because you got so much knowledge about fishing in this area. Now, these guidebooks came out before you had the internet. So nowadays you can Google anything in my books and find it in no time at all and be on the streams or whatever. I'll tell you a little bit more about what's in them in a minute. But back then they were really instructional guidebooks. Like you would go anywhere, and if you want to go somewhere and learn the region and go hiking or biking or fishing, whatever, there were tons of these sort of do-it-yourself guidebooks. More like regional guidebooks. To help you do things that you might want to do. Now that information, like I said, is at your fingertips on Google. You can watch a YouTube video on anything you need to. But because I was teaching technical writing, I was able to marry my experiences, write what you know, which was fishing, and my experiences all these years up to that point in actually going in this area and fishing, with a need for that in publishing, which were these guidebooks. And so my ideas, my interest in writing about literary theory kind of waned, and then I began wanting to write these guidebooks. So that's where I veered off that direction then. And so to get them published, I knew that how I went through the process with this book. I went and looked for publishers who were publishing similar stuff to what was in my book. Like the index of my book, I looked up where the publishers were for a lot of the contemporary theorists I was writing about, who was publishing their work. And that's how I found SUNY Press. And then what you do is you query those presses. You pitch them basically. You write a query. It's a formal document that you would write on your work, and they give you stipulations and guidelines what's expected in the query. Sometimes they expect a chapter of the book. Sometimes it's just an abstract. Sometimes they want the whole book. And I queried UVA Press, and I was really fortunate because most of the time you start querying. I had a whole list of different outdoor writing, UVA publishes a lot of outdoor guidebooks. It's one of the things they do, their areas. And I had a whole bunch of other outdoor publishing commercial presses, not so much academic presses. And before I even heard back, I sent out all the queries, and well, you only want to do it. Some of them will accept simultaneous queries, some publishers won't. So I sent out to a couple that would accept simultaneous, and I said, when to UVA. 3 days later, I got a phone call from the managing editor of UVA Press. We want to publish your book. And I said, great. So I just started putting it together, and every book follows this. So basically, the first book led to a whole series of books. Because once I got the contract for the first book, got the first book in and everything, she said, okay, what's the next book going to be about? It was really nice how it fell into place. And all the books follow the same format. They've got an overall section at the start on, sort of a preface to what to expect in that section, and then the fish species that are common to that region. This one's on the highlands of Virginia. There's also one I did on West Virginia, where I covered Monongahela National Forest, Mercer County, Pocahontas County, Bluestone, all that area up there, Cranberry backcountry, one up there. And because the first one I wrote was on New River Valley, where I fished my whole life, I didn't have to do a whole lot of research, empirical research. But for the rest of them, I actually had to go and fish all these places. So over the course of the next, I think 5 of them came out in 6 years. So over the course of the next 6 years, I traveled around and fished all these different regions and wrote about them. And each book has the same format: sections on the fish that are in those regions, then a section on all the trout streams that are in those regions, and definitions of different stocking schedules. And there's a lot of sort of nuts and bolts information. You see, they're pretty thin. There's not a lot of fluff. This isn't flowery writing. This is no nonsense information. So you can stick this in a backpack or a fishing pack and go out with it and find the places you're going. Every place, there's maps in here, but every single place I talk about fishing, I had to pair to a gazetteer. Those big atlas and gazetteers you see that are red. That nowadays you can, like I said, you can Google this stuff and find it. You don't need all these. But I had to go and reference all this, and I used these big gazetteers to drive around, and I would put the directions in, and so that somebody wanted to go and fish a place that nobody had ever put on the map could find it. Every single river that was in the area, I floated and wrote about the put-ins and takeouts, and about the rapids and what to expect if you floated. Every single stretch of every river. I fished every lake. Then there was a section on every lake, all the lakes that were in each area. I fished all the lakes. I have a raft that I can float rivers on. I also have a jet boat that I fish on lakes. And then there's an appendix that has all kinds of information like outfitters, tackle shops, and places to stay, and all that. So I just followed that same format, replicated it in each successive book, and ended up with a series of 5 of these that were published.
How do you, it's so much time, and you put that energy in it. Like, let's say when you get a call that they're going to publish you, do you feel kind of like, is it a feeling of relief, or like, well, it's my, like you take it in like a business stride, it's my job, or do you feel like, for writing, it just seems, is it almost like a little kid who gets what they wanted for Christmas? Are you really, how do you feel when you put that much time into it and somebody calls you and says, hey, we're going to publish you?
You're pretty excited. Yeah, you really are. It's just, it's like anything. Once you get your foot in the door with it, though, you kind of figure out how the game's played. And I think most good writers, I can tell you one thing, people who are true writers, like Hemingway, he diligently, every day, he was very disciplined, would get up every morning and write. If he wasn't writing, he was out of sorts. He would start in the afternoon and do his drinking and cavorting and fishing and all evening, and all of his experiences that he would put into his writing the next day. But he would kind of separate the two, and he always had to write. At the end of his life, when he could no longer write, he was no longer himself, and that's when he took his life. He had a lot of electroshock treatment. He'd been in some plane crashes. He couldn't think to write anymore, and he didn't see how he basically couldn't go on. And that's how powerful it can be for a true writer. True writer, I'm always writing at home. I'm playing around with poems or working on some things that I never expect really to publish one day, but it's just that I have to be writing it. So I've got a whole folder of things I'm working on in progress at the house. Maybe one day. I've got some new poems that I brought today that I can read at the end, that I just wrote the other day. So it's just, it's something that it gnaws at you if you're not doing it. And I think if you really, once you publish and once you feel that, I want a connection to it, it's a drive. It's a drive. It drives you, whether you're getting published or not. A lot, there's an adage you just get used to rejection if you're going to write. A lot of great writers were rejected numerous times. I was really fortunate. My work's pretty much just fell into place. Just really fortunate as far as that goes.
Do you think that because fishing is so much part of the culture, it's pretty much a family tradition in many cases, but you lucked out, you fell into this pretty much on your own, or was somebody there who encouraged you within your family, took you out, showed you how to do things? But what I'm trying to transition to is, you're really doing, you enjoy this. This is a terrific part of your life.
You become married. Like I said, there's passions of writing and fishing into into project that led to the books. And like I said, the turn to the nonfiction was a result of being at Bluefield State teaching technical writing classes. So that's how I ended up taking that, veering off in that direction. My grandfather was the first one to take me fishing, but not the grandfather that lived up here, because he died when I was very young. And one of the poems that's being published in this anthology that's coming out this year, I'm going to talk about at the end, is about that grandfather. It was another grandfather. So just keep moving along, and I'll be happy to answer questions as we go or at the end. I was invited to the Virginia Festival of the Book to read and talk about my books, my series of books. And that was quite an honor. I was there, actually had lunch with Rita Dove, because some of my folks she's at UVA, some of my folks from Florida State who were reading there, who were professors in creative writing there, because it's such a prestigious program, were big name headliners at the Festival of the Book. I was just one of the sideshow things. I don't know if you've ever been to the Festival of the Book, but it's a massive.
Only through C-SPAN.
Do what?
Only through C-SPAN.
Yeah, it lasts like 3 days, 3 or 4 days at UVA, and they have readings all over town, all over Charlottesville, in libraries and bookstores, on campus, and they have writers from all over the country. John Grisham's there. I mean, there's all kinds of people, big name people that would be there. And so, I was just one of the smaller regional folks that had a little session going. And some faculty from Florida State who I knew were there, and they knew Rita Dove very well. And they invited my wife and I to lunch with them. So I had lunch with all of them at the festival. A couple years later, I was invited to a panel on outdoor writers. I was a member of the Virginia Outdoor Writers Association, and Bob Gooch, got his name at the top here, was a famous outdoor writer in Virginia. He wrote a column for years and years called Sports Afield that ran in all the local newspapers. So it was a column on the side, and he had written 2 books: the Virginia Fishing Guide and the Virginia Hunting Guide. And he was a freelance writer. They were sort of like the Bibles outdoor, or fishing and hunting in Virginia for the 80s, and the 90s. And he and I did a panel together on outdoor writing. And he was probably in his mid-80s at the time, and I met his wife. And so he died a few years later, and the press contacted me. this came out in 2012, and said that Virginia, his wife, had asked that I revise, that they wanted to revise the Virginia Fishing Guide, and said she had requested that I revise it. So I had to take this book used to be about this thick, I had to redo the entire index. I had to revise many sections of it because a lot of stuff was outdated. And I had to write a new introduction to it. So it says updated by M.W. Smith, and so I actually get royalties on this book now as well as my other ones. And by the way, if you're looking at making a lot of money, don't go with university presses. These are very meager royalty checks, trust me. But it's still nice to get paid for your work. So anyway, I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to, and that's the last thing I've had published by any major publishing by press. However, that gets us to the next thing is this. There's a book coming out this summer, and I hope to have a reading of some of the authors here on campus next fall. And if you're teaching this class again in the fall, we'll build it around that. We'll build that into it somehow. But I've already offered to have a book signing, a reading, because it's being published by West Virginia University, and the title of it is Mountains Piled Upon Mountains: New Appalachian Nature Writing. So I submitted some poetry to that, and I was accepted. So I'm going to be included in that anthology. So, do you all have any other questions for me?
Do you have a particular format that you like to use? Because you mentioned haiku, that was...
That just was something, probably a trivia crack question they were playing about haiku. Probably, which one's haiku? And then I answered 757, and then I said, let's all come up with a haiku. Because they play trivia crack, my daughter and my wife, all the time.
No, they were privileged to read 17 syllables, which is by a Japanese-American author. We read that this semester, and it's all about haiku.
Yeah.
The point of haiku is
It's
as you wrote the
575.
imagery.
I said 757. It's 575, right? It's 17. Yeah, that's
17
right,
syllables
575.
is the title of the story.
Oh.
Yeah.
And of course, they may recall this, the contrast that the woman becomes a totally different personality every night writing her haiku, and she even wins the competition. But then a husband who is very practical minded, he's a tomato farmer, and he's just oriented to making sure the crop is okay and all of that. And when she is presented this beautiful picture as a prize by the newspaper guy, he takes it and puts it into the fire. He's so upset, and there goes her whole world of haiku writing and so on, totally suppressed. But it points to a refined existence, a very, very refined existence, the whole idea of writing haiku.
Yeah.
It's all imagery, and it gives you that moment of that emotion or whatever it is it's trying to convey. It's just a few seconds of it, and that's it. But that story to which we were all exposed, it really allows you to gain empathy into the writer's world, into the writer's wanting to express himself or herself and not being allowed to do so because of the practical, because of life and so on. So to be able to then emerge from that, the constraints and all the restrictions that life puts on you, to be able to sit down and actually produce poetry or a short story and so on.
Yeah, I think going back to that question you asked me earlier, I don't really write the creative stuff to get it published.
Yeah.
I just write because I need to write.
Yep.
And I would just encourage everyone to writing is a great cathartic tool. It's a great way of understanding the world around you, making sense of things in your life. Write what you know, but There's all these vehicles now out there for you to get published. Like there are lots of blogs, there's lots of online zines. There's lots of ways you can get your work out to the world and influence people with your writing. So it doesn't have to be just to get published by a press or try to make money. There's really certainly gifted people who can make lots of money as writers. Nicholas Sparks and
Grisham.
Grisham and